I will convene the meeting at 9:05 and explain that as a constituent entity of the California Democratic Party, we cannot fundraise. If you have a piece in your heart for Rocky's documentary, you can go there to film and figure out a way to take care of your conscience or whatever it is. um, we are a caucus open to free to all registered Democrats in the state of California. We welcome, oh, Rocky is here, and we will ask him to tell us when that is. We welcome your membership. I'll drop that information in the chat. If you're not already a member, we'd love to ask you to consider. The membership dues can actually be waived or they are nominal. And we also have a program that allows us to cover the costs of people who have waived or reduce cost fees. So that covers our Zoom costs and the rest of this to keep the lights on. Welcome, Rocky. I'm not sure if you're ready to speak or intended to, but somebody was asking about how to view the documentary who was unable to last night. And you did mention there were a couple more screenings coming up. So if you would like to mention when those would be, that would be great, or just put it in the chat. Um, if I don't hear from you, I'm guessing you're not in a position to speak. So putting in the chat or doing it later will be fine. Okay, so I will carry on and welcome you. And I think it's time to roll to our program. I'm really grateful to those of us who are here early on Saturday morning. There should be time to go door knocking after for this all important election coming up. But right now, we'd like to hear exactly why and how it becomes so important. We'll hear from Danfeng Koon. Um, I will let you introduce yourself. I'm sorry, you'll do a better job than me, and I appreciate you being here. Let me just quickly mention we have academics Danfeng Koon and Jonathan Sawyer who will be talking with us, and advocate from policy group with for the separation of church and state, Mr. Jeremy Cohen, and then afterwards we'll turn to Tamara Pello and others that may have some words of wisdom about the North Country. And right now we'll turn to Tom Flume. Thank you.
Great. So Danfeng Koon from the University of San Francisco. I was an educator for a long time and then went back into doing research and academia. I help to prepare educational leaders now for stepping into that role and have been doing research on the far right in education policy. We're also part of a large national network of researchers that are doing this work. And so there's lots of people with lots of different expertise. And so Jonathan is part of that network. And so if you're ever interested in learning more, there are others that are really interested in doing this work. So I'm going to share, I'm going to do kind of screen sharing. Okay, so let me know if you are able to see. Yes?
You can see.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So the research that I'm doing now is in California, Texas, Ohio, and Florida, and we're looking at the far right in education. Here's some of my colleagues. If you were able to see Mom's Club yesterday, the documentary, it does a really great job of really sharing the story of the far right attack on school board in Southern California, and many of you are probably familiar with that. For this, we focused on Moms for Liberty, which emerged in 2021 in California and kind of nationwide, but really seems to be waning. But we still think it's important to understand, right, their playbook. We want to understand them as a case of, let's see, moving. So understanding them as a case of contemporary, like women's activities and far right movements. And so, as you know, far women and far right movements are not new. They were active in Nazi Germany. They were active in kind of Hindu nationalist groups, and they were also active in Reconstruction. And so, really, to think about them as part of this larger trajectory. And really across all of those movements, the things that you see is that women and mothers are seen as essential to the continuation of the nation, the race, the religion, right? And so that's kind of why women are stepping up. Women are in need of protection from the threats of others, right? So other races, other religions. And then this idea that motherly love justifies aggression and violence to protect their young. So that's where the mama bears kind of idea comes from. And really, women are seen as also softening the look of far-right movements, so much more violent extremism, and it broadens their appeal. And so we see Moms for Liberty really playing this role across the country, but also here in California. We also wanted to think about, Moms for Liberty is less active today than they were several years ago, but really that the sentiments that they're trying to draw on are still there. And so really to learn from that and also to learn from their playbook that can be picked up very quickly by any other organization. Most of the research on Moms for Liberty has been in Florida and other much more red states, but we wanted to study it in California, and we think some of those findings might be helpful for you all here. So you all are probably familiar with this, and so this is more just it's described in the paper more, but like many of these organizations, the playbook really is networking, right? And kind of radicalizing people as they're networked into the larger group. They're using legal strategies, they're targeting school boards, and they're curating lots of resources on their websites. I think what was most important when we were looking, so we looked at all of the California Moms for Liberty websites, we looked at their podcasts. What we think is interesting is their franchising models. They're really organized like a business franchise, right? So it's like, three of you can come together, say, I want to start a chapter. You pull together 10 more of your friends. You talk to Moms for Liberty National. They give you a little starter packet, $65, and you're kind of good to go. But you are very much controlled by the larger national organization and have to be approved, right? And so that franchising model allows just very few number of people in a couple places to then be connected to a much larger movement. And with social media, you could have 10 people, rallying outside something, and all of a sudden that becomes spread nationally on social media, and it amplifies the voices of really kind of a vocal minority. And so when we looked at the messages that they're using, this is also probably not a surprise, but their core messages for their own membership, really to build it, is around like we are in a life and death battle between good and evil. And really the good is white implied Christian nationalist identities. And then the bad is really seen as this communist or leftist ideology, particularly being spread in schools. And so this kind of life and death battle is really how they're motivating their own constituents to be active. But of course, that message isn't particularly broad, right? Especially for a place like California. So what you see is that they're bridging across communities to try to, bring more people into the tent. And they're using parental fears that I think many parents are experiencing. The idea that our kids are not okay. So they're thinking about the loneliness, they're thinking about the confusion, the like, where are we, what kind of jobs are we going to have, right? With AI, I mean, there's so much anxiety among young people right now, and they do kind of capture that. They also, there's a lot of anti-corporate sentiment throughout California, right? This idea of the education industrial complex, any kind of like profiting off young people. They also, pull on that narrative, and they warn, okay, it's a transgender industrial complex, right? That is trying to groom your children, change your children, and they're making money from it. Again, parents are in the dark. And then the idea that schools themselves are helping or encouraging young people to transition means that everything from social emotional learning, wellness centers, community schools, that is all seen as part of the liberal takeover of schools. And as an educator, it was very hard for me to understand, like, how could you be against social emotional learning? But the idea is that our children are depressed, and the more that they ruminate on their feelings, the more depressed they get, right? And so there's this a sense of like what parents are really concerned about, but then turning it into an anti-public schools message. And this is a slide from one of their websites. And so when we looked at their more long-term strategies for California in particular, they were very clear in their podcast and in some of these materials that we looked at that they're wanting to appear more moderate, right? So they're claiming to be nonpartisan and trying to distance themselves a bit from the extremism that we saw like in Mom's Club and earlier years. They are very specifically trying to radicalize more churches, right? So there are some that they feel like are fully on board with their program, but there are other congregations they feel like they need to reach out to. There are members of their coalition they call Black-pilled patriots that seem more extremist, and they're trying to reach out to them to say there's hope, be okay with more incremental change over time. And one thing that was particularly alarming is that they were saying, well, any boards we should begin to target. And for example, higher education and the control over teacher education programs is something that they named as like a next horizon for their organizing. Um, and finally, this last piece is that they are very intentionally trying to build bridges with other communities, particularly in California, conservative Asians who are anti-affirmative action, and conservative gays and lesbians who feel like they've taken our community too far, right? So it was okay to have gay marriage, but now we're talking about something that is beyond. So some of our work, not in this particular paper, but we do systematic kind of network mapping of collaborations, connections between far-right actors. And this was described in the Moms Club really well. There's other kind of more popular versions of this. And this is kind of the systematic, academic-y, nerdy way of doing it. But something that we do notice this Californians for Equal Rights Foundation. This is the conservative East Asian, so Chinese, Vietnamese, anti-affirmative action, anti-ethnic studies organization, and they very much are seeing themselves as kind of connecting those communities with Moms for Liberty and other far-right orgs. And also the California Policy Center, which connects this group also with more like deregulation, anti-union policies in the state. So I want to leave you with just one quote from a leader of Moms for Liberty in California. She says, "We have people telling us all the time, you are in California, you are in a losing battle. They say to us, you're in the belly of the beast. And what do we say back? We say, no, we're the tip of the spear." And so I do think that that is the sentiment. And so wanted to share that. And if you're interested, this is a QR code to a crowdsourced K-12 resource guide that we think is helpful for, I mean, anybody involved in education. So it has, all the major trackers, it has things to read and things to learn, and also examples of ways that people are fighting this across the country. So I'm going to end there and happy to take questions later.
Thank you very much. So interesting. I love the network mapping. I love the resources. We will share those with others. And I think our plan now is to hear from Dr. Sawyer and the others, and then we will discuss things and have our questions at that time, if that's okay, unless there's anything burning from anyone right now. Otherwise, I'll ask Dr. Sawyer, please, to introduce yourself and tell us, do you have any slides, or will you
I
be
do
speaking?
not. No,
Okay,
I'll just be
great.
speaking.
Sounds good. Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Sarah. Yeah, so appreciate being here and being invited to this. And Danfeng, thanks for the important work you're doing. I really find your work compelling and interesting. So again, my name is Jon Sawyer. I come from the National Education Policy Center, housed at the University of Colorado Boulder. And while I'm in Colorado, my connection to this topic is California is near and dear to my heart on this. In my late adolescence, I became radicalized in a far-right, independent, charismatic / Pentecostal megachurch that was one of the fastest growing megachurches at the time. It's since imploded and is no longer in existence, but it was housed in Southern California, in Irvine, California. And it was part of this organization called the New Apostolic Reformation, some of you may have heard of, which advances these very dominionist-oriented ideas of conquering these various spheres of society, whether that be business or the family, arts and media, education, among others. Yes, and Matthew, you mentioned Bethel Church, very familiar with them as well. And the groups that I was radicalized in all intermingled with Bethel forms of religion and politics and ideology. But I wanted to bring out an analogy to hone in on the work that I do. Consider a youth who is in a school who goes to a counselor or an embedded therapist or a trusted educator. And let's consider that this youth has been subjected to abusive practices, to psychological and even physical harm. And yet the youth views the harm that they've experienced as something that is on them, something that they are responsible for. And they feel like everything will be better and the inner turmoil that they're experiencing will go away if they can just better please the abusive authority figure in their life. Well, we know that it would be absolutely ridiculous to go to that youth and to say, yes, we're going to help you better learn to please the abusive figure in your life. And I bring up that analogy because that is the heart of conversion therapy, or what I call conversion practices. And often when we think of conversion therapy, we think of someone who's going to a psychologist sitting in an office and they're being talked through all of the emotional turmoil of their past in order to erase a part of their identity and become straight, etc. But my argument is that conversion therapy spans many more practices beyond that one narrow slice of the harmful pie that we're discussing. Conversion practices are fundamentally about someone who is working to invalidate a fundamental aspect of their humanity. And I think what we're seeing in anti-LGBTQ activism, as we saw in Mom's Club last night, that these conversion practices and these conversion ideologies are present everywhere. It's all about putting the blame on the victim around a fundamental aspect of their humanity. So some work that I've done is around Christian nationalism. It's around the rise of the far right and how it's been infused in religion and politics within the United States. But I'm also thinking about how the legal systems are getting their say in these conversion ideologies and practices, even at the Supreme Court. So we recently had a case out of Colorado with a licensed therapist by the state who was saying that her free speech rights were violated due to a anti-conversion therapy law in the state. Now, it wasn't the worst possible outcome. The Supreme Court didn't say that all states throughout the United States can now practice conversion therapy, but they did kick it back down to Colorado and said that that law needs to be subject to a heightened level of constitutional scrutiny, which I argue in a piece that Sarah linked will open the floodgates for more, in my view, autocratic, authoritarian, abusive forms of religion and politics seeking to delegitimize a person's fundamental humanity. And one piece of that, and I know I'm just about out of time, that I want to emphasize is that so many youth who are subjected to conversion therapy think that it's a good thing. They don't think that they should be gay or lesbian or trans. And so for us to move past this culture war era, we need to recognize the self-invisibility that sometimes LGBTQ youth bring to this. And one of the last, maybe the second to last thing I'll say is that I have a conservative family member. When they learned that I was getting into education work, they lamented that, can't we just think about reading, writing, and arithmetic? I mean, what is it with all this trans stuff in schools, you know? And my response to that is, if a aspect of your personhood is being invalidated, that's going to affect you emotionally, and it's going to be really hard to learn the classics. It's going to be really hard to lean into reading, writing, and arithmetic. And then the last thing I'll say, I promise this is the last little bit, is I feel like on the left, we need to reclaim the religious freedom narrative. Because right now, we're seeing this polarization of LGBTQ versus religion, religion versus LGBTQ. And my argument is that at our founding, religious freedom was actually enacted because, as imperfect as they were, founders saw that dissent was being punished. And there needed to be a way that those who are viewed as heretics and dissenters could be protected for their views. And I'm not saying that being LGBTQ is heresy or dissent necessarily, but I am saying that for those on the far right who view me as sinful, who view trans people as somehow demonically possessed, who view us as heretical, then religious freedom should protect us, irrespective of your views about me or others. So reclaim the narrative. That's especially important as we see tomorrow the White House is sponsoring a national prayer event on the Mall with mostly evangelical Christians who are going to be praying over the nation. Thanks for your time.
Great. Thank you so much. We will come back. I have many questions and love to explore further some of the framework that you hold. And in fact, but first we will hear from Mr. Jeremy Cohen, who is involved with the with actual advocacy of separation of church and state, and he may have some comments on this as well. Mr. Cohen?
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you so much, Danfeng and Jonathan, for your wonderful research. And I'm going to give a shout out to Rocky as well for the wonderful film that he put together. A lot of amazing work. And I'm going to go ahead and put a link in the chat. That's for the organization I represent, which is Americans United. I'm the president of the Orange County chapter, which happens to be the only chapter on the West Coast of the United States. And I also have a link in there for our national chapter. And to echo what both Danfeng and Jonathan were talking about, the advocacy portion of what we do is we actually file lawsuits. And most of the time we do a lot of what we call amicus briefs. We actually were very fundamental in what happened in Oklahoma, if none of you are aware of that, not only with the Ten Commandments, but also the attempt to put St. Isidore's Catholic Charter School as the first all Catholic charter school. They were going to discriminate so heavily. We put a lawsuit up. We fought them. We actually had it taken to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court sent it back to the state Supreme Court, which had already said no. So that kind of put the monkey wrench in that one. And that was a very good litmus test because it kind of sent the message to the rest of the country that there is going to be blowback, that we're not going to just allow this to happen. Also, we were very instrumental in Texas. We have a group called SEAT, which is Students for Education. They put together a, I guess you'd say, documentary that they went in front of the Texas legislature, and basically a bunch of 17-year-olds said to the Texas legislature, we don't need you telling us what we need to read. And so they were going against book banning. And I bring those things up because all of those tie into what Moms for Liberty, what other organizations, especially the Dark Money and Christian Nationalism, which is all funded by the Heritage Foundation and others, is this attempt to totally undermine education and to undermine people's, freedom to choose what they want. But the way they're doing it, it's subterfuge in a lot of ways. They are very disingenuous. They will tell you one thing, and they're giving a lot of misinformation and disinformation. And one of the things we do at Americans United is we actually go to school board meetings, we go to city council meetings, we make our presence known, and even though we're a 501c3, we don't take so-called a political position, but we do go in and fight vehemently. And the thing that is really nice about us is, as a national organization, we have the teeth and the power to, and the legal representation to get in to the courts, to get to basically attack these folks where they stand. And we do a lot of that kind of advocacy work. I encourage everybody to get involved with a local chapter of Americans United or the national chapter or the national, as I call it, the mothership. We recently had a conference just a couple of weeks ago in DC, and I was on the Hill and I met with the different representatives and different senators of my state, which is California. And even though people say, oh, you're a blue state, like both Danfeng and Jonathan said, just because we're a big blue state doesn't mean we don't have these issues. And I always wondered, why do we have the only chapter on the West Coast in Orange County, California? Well, because we're the hotbed of republicanism, folks. That's all there is to it. As Jonathan said, with what goes on in Irvine, I mean, we have issues right now going on in Irvine with our city council. So, and what's marvelous is when we hear about that, we immediately shoot something off to national and they get on it. And all of a sudden there's a lawsuit, or they're, kind of breathing down the city council's neck in Irvine. And so, we know that this issue is alive and well in Southern California, throughout California. Just because it doesn't seem to have a big, loud voice doesn't mean it isn't there. And I wanted to touch on really briefly, what they do is so interesting to me. They sidle up to people. They use a lot of emotional buzzwords. They basically attack from an emotional standpoint of making people feel, oh, we're your friend, we care about you, we want to help you. And a lot of people don't have the background or the knowledge to know what is actually happening. And they feel, oh, you're taking my side, you're my friend. And all of a sudden, like we saw in the film in Chino Hills, you have a school board that is just stacked. We had that happen a couple of years ago with the Orange Unified School District. It was stacked. We've had problems with Santa Ana Unified that is, they'll start putting in things about getting rid of, trans books or LGBTQ books, and they're just, it's very pervasive. And they do it in a very subtle, almost low key way, and try to make everybody think, oh, we're your friend, we're here to help, and the exact opposite. And the one thing I really wanted to touch on too is one of the things we did several years ago. We looked at Moms for Liberty and we actually asked them very pointedly, where do you get your funding? And they told us, oh, we get it from bake sales. Well, we have access with a legal team to their IRS statements, and we looked and we found that 90% of their money was coming out of the Heritage Foundation or the Koch brothers. So when they tell you it's coming from bake sales, yeah, they are telling you the truth, but the percentage is not enough to do the kind of things they're doing. So there's a lot of misinformation, and you have to be willing to research this and look at it and find out that this is really what their motivation is they want to take the whole country in a direction. And the way I say it, they want to take us backwards a couple of hundred years and put us at a place where we don't want to go back to. And I'm going to finish with this. At our recent conference in Washington, we had a group of people there that named themselves ex-evangelicals, which is a wonderful new term. These are people who are evangelicals who are now ex. And they are a marvelous group. And these are the people we need so badly right now, because these people have been involved with the evangelical community. They know the speak that's going on with evangelicals, with the Christian community. And these are the people we need to get in there and help us, really help us communicate to a lot of people who are evangelical, who are Christian, and help them understand that Christian nationalism is not Christianity. It is a political ideology that has co-opted the name Christianity in order to emotionally touch so many people and bring them into this place of saying, we're on your side, we're going to help you, and we're going to give you back your country, when the reality is the exact opposite. It's 180 degrees. And so thank you all so much for your time and effort.
Sarah, you're muted.
You're still muted.
So sorry. Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Stacking school boards is a wonderful way to jump off to our next presenters who will tell us more of what they're seeing on the ground. And I'm hoping we hold in mind that some of this is to help us as, members of the Democratic Party, as we knock on doors and understand what we see and how we interact with and encounter who we see on the ground. So please, I'm not sure if Shay Stevens is here, or Tamara Pillow will speak to us, give us some observations and awareness of what's happening in the north of the state. Since last night's film, and many of our presenters here are from Southern California, and the idea is really to hold a picture of patterns and preparation for what's coming next and how to encounter it. So it's very important that we get some perspective on our northern and rural counties. Tamara, thank you. Oh, and before I hand it over, let me just ask you, Amanise has probably not figured out how to clone herself. So somebody is Daisy. If you could raise your hand, then I'll label you correctly. And then text me in the background if you're not Amanise, and I will label you correctly. Thank you. Sorry, Tamara.
Yeah, no problem. So I have nothing prepared. So I'm just going to talk about kind of stuff that's been going on in my district and has kind of started bleeding out to other districts. I'm in Anderson, which is a much smaller community than even, I mean, Reading is right up the road, and it's a completely different political atmosphere. Just the 10-mile drive up the freeway, it's completely different. Anderson and Cottonwood, which is where my district is, very, very conservative already. We are a very, very dark red spot in our very big blue state. And so it felt easier for them to kind of move in for our Moms for Liberty. There's a very core group of them. They go meeting to meeting to meeting throughout the county, all supporting each other. Right now, we have a couple of members that have tied on to Sonia Shaw and are running for state offices and have kind of hitched themselves to her bandwagon. And so if you drive around town right now, it's election time, so you can see all of their signs, and they're all grouped up in the individual houses, and you can see who's aligned with who just by driving around the neighborhood. In 2022 is when we started getting the Moms for Liberty members on our boards. The first one did come on my board, the Anderson High School District. And she has kind of infiltrated everything at this point. She's also on the county school board. She's been appointed to the elementary school board. She doesn't even live in our district anymore, but she's still on our board. And has kind of taken well, I'm going to do this until somebody tells me I can't, and nobody is willing to stand up and do it. It's very much lead by force, by fear, and all of that. When she first came in 2022, all of her people would kind of come to all of our board meetings, and they'd create chaos and just this fear of things we're doing to the kids. At one point, one of them mentioned that we were providing abortions in the cafeteria, and just this absolute off the wall crazy stuff that just drew in those parents that are scared or they don't know what's going on with their kids. It's like everyone else was saying, it's very much rooted in fear and chaos and just kind of preying on the vulnerability that is, oh my God, I don't know what my teenager or my child is up to when they're away at school for 6 hours. Or there's this bigger issue that the government, the federal government as a whole, is bringing up about transgenders, and there's men and women's sports, and none of these things are happening in our district, but that's not stopping them from using that to build on the fear and the things that parents just naturally have with their children and the vulnerabilities that are there. So we started having these huge meetings where both sides of the aisle would be there and there'd be yelling, and we had to move into a bigger building to have our meetings because we had so many people showing up for board meetings. And she would pass all of these resolutions and things that over time you kind of figure out meant nothing. It's entirely political grandstanding. Um, like they passed the you have to out children thing. We have a board policy that says that we are supposed to, within 3 days of a child telling us they want to go by a different name, we're supposed to notify parents and all of that stuff. But it's so vague and doesn't give any direction. There's no administrative regulation tied to it. So it has no teeth. So it's there, and it caused this big hullabaloo about, all of the kids showed up. There was crying, there was yelling, name calling, all of the everything. And then there's nothing that came out of it. So as a teacher, I don't have to do anything because there's no guidance from my district saying how this is supposed to happen. There's no anything. So it was just a political play that did nothing. And so we're kind of finding out that the more she does this stuff on all of the different boards that she's on, it doesn't mean anything. It's all just designed to create chaos and to put the spotlight on, oh, you don't want to do, what was the latest one? Was that we were going to have some sort of it's nationalism, some week celebrating the 250th birthday of the United States, which is great, but it's the last week of summer school, and who cares at the last week of summer school? And that we're going to start incorporating, what is it? Assemblies and things like that to go over civic duty and all of that. Very, very concerning as far as the nationalism piece goes and bringing that in. It's getting a little 1940s Germany to me. So I kind of fought back a little bit, just said, what does this actually look like for our teachers? So are we going to be adding things? Is this a change in working conditions? Because from a union standpoint, I'm going to argue with you about that. Because if we're adding things to teachers' plates, we need to talk about what that looks like. And it really just comes down to, we wanted you to fight about this so that we could say the union is against the United States, because that's what it boiled down to. And their response was, well, why don't you want to celebrate the United States? Well, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, how are we doing this? I need you to answer those questions. And so I'm kind of finding that that's our way to fight back, is just to ask them those questions, because they're getting their stuff from Moms for Liberty corporate or whatever it is, where it's all cookie cutter same stuff, and they don't have the answers to those questions, because for some of them legally they can't do it. But it starts that conversation and turns it around so that they can weaponize it against us and say, oh, you don't want to stand up and do the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, no, you added this other thing that I don't agree with, but you're going to use that against me because I disagree, and say I just don't love the United States. And it's very, very successful in our community in turning people against our education, against educators and things. So yeah,
So
that is about what's going on here.
yeah, and do you feel that there's anything particularly special to the North Country amongst this, or are you finding commonalities from what you're hearing elsewhere? And I would pose this to, I'm posing the question to Ms. Pello, but to everyone. I'd love us to talk about how these things might be regionally oriented.
I think that we don't have the big bang that some of the larger and more liberal counties have as far as when they come in. I know that our one member that's managed to get into everything, her goal is to get on Fox News. That is absolutely her goal, and she is trying to rile everything up so that she can make the national news and do the things. But our community largely agrees with her. So there's not the huge community uproar as to, oh, you cannot do these things. And so they're not getting the big bang for their buck up here. Because it's the lonely 3 or 4 union members that show up to board meetings going, we don't really like this.
Thank
And
you.
now that we've figured out the play, it's even less effective. So
Yeah. How about some of the others of our panel? Danfeng, do you have thoughts on this?
We did do a little bit like on the grounds research in Northern California. I do think that in rural areas, the reliance on podcasts and alternative news sources is very, very important because that's how people become radicalized. So I think watching that play out was interesting. I also think the North, there's a long history of what are they called? The folks who want to separate from California. So there's
the
a
state of
whole
Jefferson.
Yes, so there's a long history of kind of radical separatist organizing, and so I think that had a particular relationship. I think that that group, like folks were married, right? In like with the Moms for Liberty people. So literally that organization, right, they're related by marriage. So things like that I thought were interesting about the North.
And
Thank you,
the
Jonathan.
one piece I'll add to this historically is that we can't think of the far right today without thinking about the countercultural Jesus movement in
Mm,
California of the 1970s.
mm,
And so there's sort of this anti-establishment bent and
mhm,
even anti-government bent
mhm,
while usurping the levers of government, a paradox.
mhm.
I was just thinking about this paradox most absolutely. I don't know, Jeremy, if you have to, but much of what Jeremy was saying as well is um, the irony here between, autocracy and one agent being in charge and the way the religiosity really enforces and uplifts that. Um, and yet it's being sold as an opportunity for individualism and individual strength. Um, Jeremy, and I don't know if you have thoughts about this. Anyone hop
I
in?
I do have some thoughts, but my thoughts mostly focus on what Tamara was saying, what's going on in the North anywhere in this country, not just in California. If anywhere at any time someone puts out a podcast or puts out something that you find objectionable and you record it even because it's a podcast, those are
Mhm.
the kinds of things that we salivate over. And the reason I say that, you send it to us and we will forward it, or you yourself can send it to AU Legal, and I put their website in the chat, and we will look into it. And because we take it very, very seriously. And the reason we take it so seriously is because we see it's a total undermining of the foundation of the Bill of Rights, of our sacred, civil right freedoms. And the more they chip away at that, it's not just going to affect people who are LGBTQ or people who are female. They will come after every single one of us if they have the chance, because they want to rewrite the Constitution. They literally have said that in Project 2025. So anytime you see something, you hear something, you get a hold of something, you yourself, because you're the witness of it, make a claim to AU, because we will take it seriously and we will go after it. And if we find there's validity, and the reason I say it's so important, if enough places and enough people make enough claims, it starts showing a pattern of validity. And if we can show that pattern, we will go after it.
Thank you. I think that instead of my leading this conversation, we'll just let people jump in and leave our panelists here and take a question first from Matthew. And if others have, please raise your hand. Let's go around. Matthew.
I would just add about the North is the how important Bethel Church has been in terms of taking over everything. So Dr. Sawyer talked a little bit about what's called the Seven Mountain Mandate, and it's really about taking over government. And they started with the Reading City Council, completely took that over. Then they started taking over the supervisors. They've been very effective in kind of controlling our assembly members and things like that. They know that they can't take over all of California as, immediately, but like if they start as Tamara knows, I mean, it's just the effect that that Bethel has in terms of local politics is so you can't understate it. It's they really control a lot of that, and I know in Siskiyou County it's starting to bleed in here. They're starting to take over businesses, and they're starting to take over smaller city councils and things like that. So that's all I wanted to add. Thank you to everyone who spoke. Great.
That's true. Bethel's been around for a really long time, and they've been kind of infiltrating like everything. Most businesses in Reading are run by people from Bethel, but they've been doing it for a long time, which is also part of the reason that when Moms for Liberty came in, Bethel was like, "Oh, we're already doing that. Heck yeah, join on the bandwagon." And so they already had this huge group, and the culture in the area was already ready and primed for them to come in and spread their nonsense.
Any more thoughts about the seven mountains and how we actually, address our neighbors and how do we talk to people without sounding crazy?
I will say, Sarah, that I mean, I identify as a Christian. I identify as a progressive Christian, a Christian on the left. And I think that is important when you're talking to people. When you identify with that, when you identify with someone who used to be in an evangelical, I know someone talked about an ex-evangelical. I am one of those. So I think it's important to know the lingo and to know the speak. Because I think sometimes if you don't have that, and if you come from maybe a very anti-religious perspective, sometimes it'll shut off. So yeah, thank you.
Sarah, this is Karen Lawson. I would like to just validate that last comment and let you know that Jeremy and I have had a meeting recently talking about the progress that's happening in Southern California around gathering progressive clergy to take tools from the Baptist Joint Commission, Christians Against Christian Nationalism, that are prepared specifically to go out to community groups, not, staying in our bubble, not staying in the congregation in the safety of the chapel, but going out into the wild world where PTAs, women's clubs, community groups who are just not informed can hear from clergy who know the lingo, know the speak, understand where the tripwires are in the conversation. And it's just great to know that the tools are already there. And so it just takes finding the right progressive clergy who see the harm to the communities when the Seven Mountains strategy and the Dominion, energy is out there, and just want to encourage everyone and at the same time say that my personal experience has been that it's very difficult to herd the cats when it comes to very busy ministers who can barely keep up with their own work. So it's almost like we have to hand feed them program opportunities with community groups, and just want to thank the AU for always being there to support us. And hopefully those comments will strike a chord with a couple in this group. And I just want to recommend supporting the progressive clergy and the community to get out there and do their thing. And I think Daisy could talk about a really profound and really impactful Chino Hills school board meeting where I believe 6 or 7 ministers had prepared quite lengthy remarks, and they shared their responsibility by going to the mark. Person number 1 would speak at the microphone, for 1 minute, and then the next person would speak and carry forward. It was very impactful. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Karen. So I wonder from our panelists what you think about this sort of relinquishing the narrative to that of religiosity, which in some ways, as we discussed before, is really kind of profoundly anti-democratic. Is it a good strategy? Is it a problem? Any thoughts?
So many thoughts and don't even know where to begin. Um, I think that there are elements of what we're seeing today on the far right that have appealed deeply to fear. But not only that, there's also a profoundness to religious experience and community and prayer and unity that I think we are doing ourselves a disservice to say that every megachurch on the right is just stoking fear. It's coupled with hope, eternal hope, present hope. And it's filled with people, I think many of whom are very genuine and sincere in their belief. I have no problem, however, exposing the hypocrisy of the leaders and the people who are benefiting financially and the prosperity gospel pushers, many of whom are at the helm and taking advantage of the sincere belief. So I think separating leader from the people in the pews is an important part of this conversation.
And that doesn't sound different from the secular world either. I would add partisanly. Other thoughts here about this from our panel?
Well, and coming from the secular world, people often mistake, they say, oh, America's united for separation of church and state. You're anti-religion. And we're like, no, we're not anti-religion. We're anything but. We want to bring everybody into the big tent, and we want everybody, on the same secular page, just understanding that these things aren't supposed to be in the public arena, meaning schools, city councils, government, any of that. But at the same time, the thing that's so amazing to me is we bring together a lot of different faith leaders, and a lot of the faith leaders, the leadership themselves realize what's going on with Christian nationalism, and they realize how much damage it's creating, and they are reaching out to their flock, so to speak, their congregants. And we have a lot of connections with the Unitarian Universalists, and we deal a lot with those in Southern California. In fact, we have 4 different congregations that we deal with on a regular basis, and a lot of that is just getting that message out to their general public. And that's why I brought up the ex-evangelicals, because reaching into the evangelical community, I think, is going to be very, very, very powerful, because a lot of these people are very, very embracing their own religious belief, which is fine, because they don't want that in government. They understand how important that is. So, I think if we can get through to a lot of the people in that kind of a community, and there are millions of Christians in this country, that we can actually make a difference. Because the thing I'll leave with this is, remember, Christian nationalism, and I like to put it as white Christian nationalism, because I think it is white supremacy. But the reality is, there are Jews that are Christian nationalists. There are Muslims that are Christian nationalists. There are Hindus that are Christian nationalists. It's not about Christianity. The reason I think a lot of us move toward Christianity is because that is where the bulk of the voting numbers are. And if those folks can be hearing this message, then that voting can actually create some change. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sarah,
Yeah,
this is Karen.
Karen, I want to let Paul have a chance to speak. He's had his hand up for a long time. Is that okay?
I just have a question. I'll come back.
Okay, let's go. We'll circle back to you, Paul. I'm sorry about that.
No problem. I just wanted to share my experiences with when I was running for school board in Chino. I ran against Andrew Cruz, who in 2018 openly said at a board meeting, In Germany, it wasn't Hitler who was bad, it was the people following his orders who were. When I went door to door to knock on to bring people's attention to this, most of them had not even known that that was something he had said, even though local news channels had covered it. It was, out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. Um, but full disclosure, I am still a Republican. I am a Christian. I was one of those never Trumper Republicans. I'm far more liberal in my Christian faith. I go to a local church here in Chino Hills, and we do get a lot of people coming over from Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, saying that Jack Hibbs is just too political and they don't like him. Um, but where I did find a lot of uh, uh, what's the word, progress, I guess, effectiveness, I'll say, is when I was talking to people, when I was knocking on the doors, because I didn't know if I was knocking on a Republican, a Democrat, Independent. I didn't know. Um, I got a lot of success with the Republicans when first by just saying that I'm a Republican. That right there was enough to seal it. So I think there is some advantages in recruiting um, some of the more moderate Republicans to start running, especially in arenas where it's just you and the other Republican. That cognitive dissonance that they have to vote between two Republicans will at least open them up to hear from you. Second, when we talked about the transgender students, my main point to the Republicans, the conservatives, the ones I could tell were very resistant to it, is look, all we want to do is educate the kids that these people exist. Nothing more, nothing less. We're not going to say that it's a good thing or a bad thing. That's up to you. I mean, it really empowers them to feel like, oh, okay, my autonomy is still being held in how I raise my kids. Absolutely. But we don't want anyone being bullied. That would be wrong. And they agree with that. And then say that the only thing we want is a unisex bathroom. Now, their first thought is, you mean a bathroom where tons of kids can go and it doesn't matter. And explaining to them what a unisex bathroom is, really like, oh, is that all you want? Yeah, that's all we want. It starts to really allay their fears. And though, excuse me, I was just really a campaign of one, but I knocked on 1,300 doors, only half of them answered, and I still got 1,300 votes. Or no, I'm sorry, 2,600 votes. So I know it was effective. I know some of them were members of Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, and I was able to persuade a percentage of them to consider me over their guy Cruz. Um, and yeah, that's been my experience. I hope that kind of hopefully adds something.
Yeah, very much. So, I mean, I think I hear you saying to go, lean into the fear and address that. Do our panelists have comments on this? No. Okay. Matthew and Karen both have additional questions. Matthew, let's make the question short.
Sure. I was just going to ask Miss Koon about, could you just expand a little bit about when you were talking about conservative gays and lesbians? I mean, I know a little bit about the gays for groomers, but that's about all I know. So I was just wondering if you could expand that a little bit. Thank you.
So it was specifically Gays for Groomers, right? That was brought on to Moms for Liberty podcast. Also, in the podcast, they talk about like their token lesbian. I don't know. I mean, and so I do think that it's a strategy that they're using, like their token lesbian who is anti-trans, right? So, and specifically in this podcast, the Moms for Liberty leader was talking about the need to not seem so bigoted. So how is it that we can, teach each other to not sound so bigoted?
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Mhm.
Thank you. And Karen had a question she tossed in the chat for me, but I don't know if you want to pose it yourself, Karen, or if it was directed more at me.
Oh, no, just being efficient. I put it in the chat.
Okay. I guess the question is, Karen is wondering about I think my terminology of clergy speaking against religious extremism being anti-democratic. So I'm not a panelist. I'm not sure if I should address that or if anybody else wishes to. There was some agreement with my formulation of that previously, but maybe we can refine that notion a little bit. I guess the question of agency and who's in charge and what that looks like and what sort of institutions structure autonomy or protections, these kinds of things. Don't know if that stimulates any thoughts.
I could use some clarity on the question exactly.
Let me read it exactly from
Yeah.
Karen. Could you help educate me as to how clergy speaking against religious extremism is anti-democratic?
Well, I would argue that speaking against religious extremism is as democratic as you could be. What this brings up for me is this narrative of how we mobilize around hope or fear. And one of the things that I wrestle with is there has been so much momentum on the right to organize around fear, to scapegoat, or what I would call scapegoat, but while the other side would say is protecting kids. My question that I'm sitting with is how do we move the evangelicals, the conservative Muslims, the Unitarian Universalists, how do we bring a coalition together around hope? As imperfectly as we've done it, we've had moments in our nation's history where that's been done, and where hope has been resisted. I'm thinking about the civil rights era, but then that has led to periods of progress that have benefited us all. Yeah. Do any of the other panelists have thoughts around how to mobilize around hope?
I'll jump in here. First of all, when Karen asked the question, the word democratic or democracy, that right there is a very important buzzword because there are elements in our society who are trying to create what we call a false new narrative. And they will take the word democracy and make us believe that you're undemocratic if you question this or if you don't believe in that. And that is part of the grand plan, is to undermine people's belief systems by changing the narrative. The fact is, the way the founders put together the Constitution, it is nothing but democratic to question everything. That is what this whole country was founded upon. And that's where we have a big job, is re-educating the public. And the reason I say that is civics education has been gone for decades. I might be one of the last generations that got civics education. As my mother said it eloquently, your freedom ends where my nose begins. In other words, everybody has a right to their belief, but you don't have a right to shove it down my throat. And what they've done is they've made it be that if you question anything, if you go against what we call patriotic, you're undemocratic. That is an absolute lie. And I'll call it for what it is because I don't think it's accurate. I think anytime we question, if a religious person questions something, it is democratic. Religious people have a very fine line because of being a 501c3. They don't want to cross that line, but at the same time, it's very democratic to question anything and to fight against it if you don't feel it's good. So I don't think, for Karen's question, I think it's very important to say that no, they're not being undemocratic. If anything, by questioning democracy, they're actually exercising their rights as a citizen. And remember, just because they're religious doesn't mean they aren't also a citizen of this country who have a right to vote and a right to a belief system. And so I think that's very, very significant, is for people to understand that there is a false new narrative being propagated, and they're attempting, as this whole panel has talked about, this is a form of indoctrinating. How do we indoctrinate not only children, but their parents and the society as a whole to believe that, oh, you're unpatriotic if you question?
Thank you.
I also, oh, Sarah, I wanted us, I'm just thinking about how this plays out in schools a bit. I think that there is now kind of a fear to talk about religion at all in school. Like, so that has become one of the controversial topics. You can't talk about it. And I think that doesn't serve us well, right? In this conversation of like, what's the role of religion and diverse religions in a democracy, is that if kids are getting the message in school that anytime religion comes up, the teacher like shuts it down. I think that's a worry. And so I do think that there are people who are trying to think about how to learn and talk and think about religion in schools. And I think that teachers need training. Like teachers need opportunities to think about what that would look like. So a lot of our on the ground research with teachers and with students, they've really, I think teachers feel very muzzled at the moment. And even if they're not saying it out loud, I think they're very, very careful about what topics they allow. And a lot of the students are saying that they've heard teachers shut down conversations, right?
And I think to your point earlier that that's some of a strategy too. I mean, that's very much how you can control um, the question of autocracy and who takes charge and who is in charge and what charge looks like and means and who decides. Sarah, did you have a question?
I did, and then I feel like it's kind of been answered, but I wanted to because I live in Big Bear, so rural. And I thought it was interesting in your paper, Danfeng, about that Moms for Liberty is more in urban areas. And I was thinking, I mean, it's because they don't need to be in rural areas, but then I've heard obviously from Tamara that they are up where you are. I mean, I think in my community, big time, we have a Calvary church that is, they kind of do the work without actually having, you know, the Moms for Liberty organization. But I was wondering if there was anything else, any other findings about rural areas that would be helpful to share.
So some of that, because we were looking at it county by county, sometimes it's hard to be able to tell so exactly where those particular chapters are. But that is something that came out in our research of California that was a little bit different from the national, in that I think in the national, Moms for Liberty tends to be primarily in suburban areas, like that's their highest. But in California, I think that they have been very active in rural areas. But if you look at just the count of the number of chapters, then we also found surprisingly that in kind of I think they're neighboring, so in counties that are neighboring like city urban areas where there are quite a few immigrants, there are pretty high income areas, you actually had a surprising number of Moms for Liberty chapters. And oftentimes I think that has to do with chapters are being created where there is a threat, right, to what people imagine as like this is what America should look like. So if there's changing demographics, if there's changing politics, you see and I think in California, because of the kind of move out of the urban areas now because of gentrification and cost of living, I think you're seeing some of these shifts that create fear and threat, and then the rise of these more extremist ideologies.
I think they also there's always, at least in my lifetime, has always been in our area this thought of, well, we don't want the ideals of the big cities of San Francisco, of LA, and that coming and disrupting our small communities. Like, we're part of California, but we're not that California. And I think that they really grabbed onto that too, that no, we're not San Francisco. We don't want all of these things that are happening in those more liberal cities and things to come and disrupt our way of life. And they really glommed onto that and ran with it.
Thank you. So I think this is really helpful again as we're in, get out the vote season. I don't know if you all want to wrap up with a word or two of insight and wisdom and brilliance of how we face our electoral season. Any thoughts, round robin? Beyond what we've just said, I think.
Yeah.
Jonathan, yeah.
Jeremy noted the white supremacist underpinnings of a lot of what we're talking about, which I would agree with. But I'd also add that I think a lot of that is more like an undercurrent that you really can't see, and also recognize that individuals that are part of mega churches that are advancing anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, et cetera, are not monolithic, that you have racial and ethnic diversity at play within these movements. And I think that's important to acknowledge, and also to approach the work as much as possible without assumptions about what people bring, and finding ways to dialogue even in brief encounters with others rather than preach.
Thank you. And I'll add to the mix, consequences for kids, things to keep in mind of how we protect or see where they're being affected in the electoral season. Any more closing thoughts?
I do want to just kind of echo the same thing I think Jonathan's saying, but just to really try to understand what are the real concerns that parents, community members actually are feeling, and that oftentimes those concerns are very similar between the left and the right, because we actually are feeling the same pressures. And so then it's more like, okay, then who are they, what's their what's their identification of the problem and then the solution to it. And so I think it is trying to figure out how to build bridges. And I absolutely think that my biggest concern is the growth of that far-right extremism tent to cover lots of immigrant communities of color. So that is my own personal concern. And I do think that that is going to be that in California will be their cutting edge. And so that's where the battle will have to be fought, I think. And so just thinking about how to do that well.
Yeah, really interesting point. Tamara, Jeremy?
To comment a little bit more, what I didn't tell you guys from the get-go, this whole group, is I actually started as an elementary school teacher for special needs, and then I taught at the university level and taught teachers and social workers how to work with special needs. And going into this voting cycle, I'm always so big on education. I think the biggest thing is educating the electorate, making people aware of what's going on, and helping them to really see that they do have a voice and they do have power and personal autonomy. And I think the biggest part of it is overcoming fear. And the reason I tie that in is because working with special needs children, there's a lot of fear. And I used to tell my kids straight out, I'd say, if anybody on that playground gives you a hard time, you just send them to talk to me. And the thing that was fun is I was usually the only male on the campus. And it's so funny to watch a fifth or a sixth grader come into a room with their tail between their legs and they're freaking out. And it's like, and they don't even realize you're not going to do anything to them because you're not going to go to jail or lose your job. But just the fact that you're, having that discussion with them. And I believe ultimately in education is how we overcome. Someone had brought up social emotional learning. That is such a very important component. I used to find it absolutely amazing. People would say to me, will you talk to my child about brushing their teeth? And I'm thinking to myself, I'm the academic here. I'm not supposed to do the social, cues with your child, but of course I would deal with that because I cared and loved all my kids. And so the reality is, I think in the voting season, it's really approaching people with a sense of caring, concern, love, their welfare, and at the same time educating them as to what needs to change. And one of the things I love to do is look at people and say, and when was the first No Kings rally? And of course, they'll look at me and go, was it last June? Was it last April? And then you just drop a little bomb and say, it was actually called 1775, and it was the Boston Tea Party. I said, we have a very long history in this country. And so guess what? We do have the power to do this. And I think that's how we get through to voters, is touch them where there's hope in their hearts.
Thank you. Tamara?
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad you brought up the special needs things. I'm special needs teacher. That's their new target up here, is they're going after our special education programs. But one of the things I found helpful is just talking to people, opening just genuine dialogue about things, not spouting off a bunch of facts and statistics and things. People don't hear it. All the numbers go in, they don't compute for them, especially in our rural communities. We don't have universities and things here, so the folks that live here tend not to be have the higher education, and so they start hearing all those numbers and they just tune right out of it. They need the things that actually impact their life. What does this actually mean for me? Make it relatable to the people, and just have the genuine facts-based conversations. And a lot of times you can alleviate some of the fears or the just misunderstandings about what's actually going on through those.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. And a quick, funny anecdote from Danfeng's point about how, or everyone's point about how, people are parents are scared. People share common concerns. When I went to the Sadakoi event, which was in the movie last night, and some of you may be familiar with these giant trailers they have where it says, "Leave our kids alone." I got there at 6 a.m. Nobody was around except me and a cameraman. And he said, "So what do you think of that?" And I said, "No, it sounds like a good idea." And he had to point out to me, no, that's the other side. I mean, he could tell by just looking at me that I didn't think it was a good idea the way they did. So funny. Yeah, capturing the narrative, performance art. Anyway, thank you everyone very much. We will send out some resources, and maybe if Danfeng's okay, the slides, and we have these reprints. And I really appreciate you being here on a Saturday morning, and I hope you have a good time at the doors. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Sarah,
Thank you
for
again.
organizing.
Thank you all. Take care.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Take care.